Right. Well, it's a couple of minutes past 12 now. I appreciate some people are perhaps still joining the webinar, but we will make a start. Like I said, I don't want to keep people waiting, but thank you so much for joining us today for this webinar, Supporting Success, Guidance for Practice Educator Training. My name is Jennifer Straker. I'm one of the professional advisors at the Chartered Society of Physiotherapy, and I take the lead nationally for practice-based learning. So I'm really pleased that you're able to join us today for this webinar. Next slide, please, Steph. So just a little bit of housekeeping. Just to let you know, this webinar will be recorded and used as a resource on the CSP website. Please keep your cameras off during the presentations and please mute your microphones. I think that is done for you already, but it's just a little reminder. We do have the Q&A feature, so please, if you've got any questions as we go along, please use the Q&A feature. And I'm hopeful we will have time for questions at the end. So if there's anything you do want to discuss and want to chat about, then please let us know and we can have a chat at the end. Next slide, please, Steph. So I'm really pleased to bring you today some absolutely fantastic speakers who have got some great experience and examples to share with you all. So we have Katie Castle, who's the Education Quality Lead in Practice Learning at NHSE South East Region. We have Joe Killiff, Head of Practice Education at the University of Southampton. Leanne Wiles, who's a Senior Lecturer in Physiotherapy at the University of Lincoln. And we have Leanne Horsley, who's the Professional Development Lead for Therapy Services at Sherwood Forest Hospital's NHS Foundation Trust. So thank you to all my speakers today. And I'm really pleased that they've got some great examples to share with you. Next slide, please. So this webinar is to introduce you to some guidance that we've been working on here at the CSP. So the guidance comes in two parts, and you'll actually find it on the CSP website. It's there. It's ready for you to have a little look at, and we've put the link later on in the slides. So after the webinar, you can feel free to have a little look on the CSP website. We've got some guidelines around practice educator training in one guidance paper. And the next guidance paper, we have guidance for managers supporting practice educators in the workplace. So that's what we're going to be talking about today as we go through this webinar. We're going to be talking around a little bit around what the guidance includes. I'm not going to read it word for word. Don't worry, that's for you to do later as you wish. But giving you some of the key points around the guidance and then giving some best practice examples as well. Next slide, please. So just a little bit of background to this project. So this is part of an NHSE funded project. However, as we are the CSP, we include all four nations. So all four nations have been considered within the guidance paper. And just so you know, we know that overall we're seeing a growth in physiotherapy student numbers, which requires more practice education opportunities. But what we also know is sometimes this demand can fall to the people who are most keen to support students. And sometimes that can lead to added pressures for them and people feeling a little bit burnt out under the added pressures of taking off a lot of students at one time. But we know that growth is a good thing. So we need to ensure that everyone across the profession is committed to supporting the next generation of physiotherapists. And this is part of what this guidance is about. Next slide, please, Steph. So just to give you a little bit of the aims of the guidance. So this guidance sits alongside the AHP Principles of Practice-Based Learning. So the AHP Principles of Practice-Based Learning was launched a couple of years ago now. It's been taken up by 10 AHPs. So 10 professional bodies have all signed up to this, which is amazing. So the AHP Principles is the vision. This is what we're aiming for our practice educators to deliver. Part of the guidance is a little bit more to the how-to. How are we going to get our practice educators to be able to deliver what's in the AHP principles of practice-based learning? So what we've aimed to do with this guidance is look to standardise or give some recommendations of what needs to be included in our practice educator training. And this is hopefully to save repetition for educators and HEIs. We recognise that everyone is under a lot of time pressure right now, whichever sector you work in. So part of this is trying to help protect time really and save repetition. The aims of the guidance is to give value and recognition to the role of practice educators. We recognise that people do so much amazing work amazing work within this space, and it's to really value our practice educators. Is to consider the well-being of our practice educators as well. We recognize sometimes, we have a lot of pressures in our clinical life, as well as any other area that you're taking students. And sometimes, we need to consider the well-being of practice educators in that. It's highlighting the shared responsibility we all have as a profession to provide practice-based learning opportunities. And it's also to help managers put in place structures to support educators, so the educators are getting the support that they need. And we recognise there's varying support in the workplace of practice educators. Some organisations have practice educators, facilitators who can help with that. Other organisations don't. So there's a lot of variation that we've had to try and take into account within this. Next slide, please. So just to give you a little bit of a background really to the process that we've been through producing this guidance. It started with a literature review, and it started a review of all the frameworks that are out there right now. And really that was to help identify those top skills that we're asking of our educators. What is it we're asking our educators to do? What skills do we require them to have? It then went on to having meetings with NHSE, HEIW, NES, and Northern Ireland placement leads to make sure we had the views from all 4 nations, as well as meetings with physiotherapy managers, HEI placement leads, practice educator facilitators, and practice educators. And this was really to establish what the challenges were out there in the practice education landscape right now. What did we need this guidance to cover, and what is the purpose of it really, and trying to get in everyone's perspective on that. We then sent out surveys to our practice educators and our physiotherapy learners. And this was off the back of the literature review, thinking of those top skills that we'd identified. And there was about 40. We ask an awful lot of our practice educators. It really is a tough role. So we themed the top skills, and we put the survey out to our practice educators and our learners to say, okay, so out of these skills that we've identified that our practice educators need to have, what do you feel are most important? And really interestingly, it came back so closely matched. So what our learners are saying and what our practice educators are saying is pretty much the same, which is really reassuring. And it made it so much easier thinking about then how we put that into actually what are we thinking needs to be included in practice educator training. And not wanting to have a spoiler here, but there was nothing groundbreaking in that, just to reassure people. Okay. So once I'd pulled all that together, we went back and sense checked with people, because it's fine having, pulling all that together, but actually, is that going to make sense in practice? Is it going to work for HEI colleagues, for practice educator facilitators, for our practice educators? So I spent a little bit of time then going back and just sense checking before then producing the guidance. So just to give you a little bit of background into the process that we've been through in producing these guidance papers there. And I'd just like to say thank you as well to everyone who got involved with the survey, everyone who I've spoken to, everyone who's inputted their ideas into this guidance paper. So thank you very much for everyone who's inputted into it. Next slide, please. So I'm going to come on to talk about a little bit now around some of the key points in the guidance papers. And then we'll move on to some best practice examples. So really echoing what the HCPC say, what NHSE is saying, that everyone really can contribute to practice-based learning. Everyone has a role to play in practice education. What we've said also from a CSP point of view, there is no set time before someone can become a practice educator. And that is because what we're seeing is taking the varying routes into physiotherapy these days. So for example, we have the apprenticeship route. We may have had someone who's been a band 4 physio assistant, who's supported students in their role as a band 4 and helped with practice education. Actually, they may feel ready when they've been through their apprenticeship and they're now working in a band 5 position. They may feel ready sooner than other people might to then contribute to the be a practice educator. It might be that someone needs a little bit longer. So we're not setting any time. What we're saying is that needs to be a discussion between the line manager and the individual as to when that person feels ready for that. Educators need time for training. We all recognise that. Education is one of our 4 pillars of practice, and it's something that we need training in, we need development in. And what we're setting is a recommendation, not a requirement, a recommendation that educator updates happen at a minimum of every 2 years. And it's a recommendation. So I don't want people panicking that if you've had your course revalidated, it's every 3 years. That's absolutely fine. But actually, the every 2 years is a recommendation that is based on the average what people are doing across the UK. But people have lots of different models of delivering update training, and actually we're going to come on to that. And we've got a great example that Katie and Joe are going to talk us through in a little bit's time. Okay. We've also looked to provide a minimum of what should be included in practice educator training. And like I've said before, it's not groundbreaking. It's more reaffirmative that, a lot of the time our educators are getting what they need from the practice educator training. But having a minimum of what we're expecting should help with reducing repetition. So, for example, I come on to my next point that HEI should recognise the practice educator training delivered in other HEIs. So, you may have got a physiotherapist who relocates from Cornwall to Derbyshire, for example. Actually, if they've already undertaken their practice educator training, we need to recognise that. And we don't want to have to repeat that. There may be some HEI specific things that you want to cover, and there might be ways in which they can do that. But actually, we need to hopefully recognise the skills people bring with them into the roles already. And I think a lot of the time that happens. But it's just, saying from a CSP point of view, we recognise that's fine. And we've also put together a few recommendations for practice educator update training as well. And it's really thinking about, I'll come on to it in a little bit, but thinking about actually what is needed from your HEIs and from your practice educators in your area. Steph, could I have the next slide, please? So I'm going to hand over to Leanne Wiles now from the University of Lincoln, who's going to talk through a best practice example around how they're giving the students on their courses skills in education. Leanne.
Thank you, Jen, for that introduction. Yes, so I'm Leanne Wiles. I'm a senior lecturer at the University of Lincoln, and I'm also the practice placement lead at Lincoln as well, supporting our placement team as an academic. So just coming on. So yeah, firstly, thank you to Jen and the CSP for inviting me to speak on this webinar. It's a real privilege to be involved in this launch event for these new guidelines, and something that speaks to me and a lot of my values around practice education I reflected in the guidelines. Just before I start, I will be coming on to the next slide of a Mentimeter. I think the link Stephanie's kindly put in the chat there as well, just to join that, just to be thinking about when we felt we first started getting involved and became an educator in practice, and just getting just a bit of fun, really, just to see kind of what our experiences are in of those who've joined today. And thank you all for joining today for this event. So now on to our 6th year, a bit of background of the programme at Lincoln. So the MSc pre-registration physiotherapy programme at the University of Lincoln, we revalidated a couple of years ago now in 2023 by both the HCPC and the CSP. The first intake on the programme was 15 learners, and our most recent intake in January is 58 learners. So as Jen's already said, kind of reflecting those growing numbers of physiotherapy students across various different programmes in the country. And I think this is a really lovely reflection of the continued and growing interest in physiotherapy and becoming a physiotherapist. Which is a great place to be in terms of supporting our learners to become physiotherapists. The ethos of the new programme is thinking about building places of care and starting with the foundations of physiotherapy practice in year 1 of the programme, incorporating into professional practice throughout the programme, and really thinking about those 4 pillars of practice again, which Jen has touched on throughout the programme, with increasing complexity into year 2. So thinking about the specific pillars of practice today that I want to talk about in the context of practice-based education, being leadership and education, as part of the revalidated programme, we have a new 15-credit module which is specifically focused on the pillars of physiotherapy practice, being leadership and education. So the aim of the module is to deepen our learners' critical and practical understanding of leadership and education, specifically in the context of physiotherapy. And learners will explore different models of leadership and education with these real world examples to further understand their opportunities when they enter the world of work as newly qualified physiotherapists, and thinking about that lifelong learning as they progress through their careers. As it's their final core physiotherapy module, learners will be encouraged to reflect on their placement experiences as well as their academic experiences, to really appreciate what leadership qualities and skills they have, and their skills in education also, and recognising all of those traits in others that they work within, to really think about how they want to demonstrate that in practice as they move forwards. Thinking about then setting the expectation and preparing the learners, as I've said, for lifelong personal and professional development, and which is really close to my heart, is paying this forward. So I'm sure all of us in the room have had the opportunity of having placements that have kind of built us into physiotherapists in that career, and really instilling that as a culture taking forward, that a normalised expectation that we support the next kind of workforce coming through, and instilling that for their future careers. So if we can move on to the next slide, please, and hopefully the Mentimeter poll. So got a bit of a mix, which is good to see. So yeah. But as another role, I'm interested in the other roles, if people want to put that in the chat as well. So I'll just kind of talk through this as hopefully some more responses come in. But we do kind of tend to see that people became educators, and I think there's lots of different reasons for that, which I don't think is within my scope today to kind of talk through and explore further. But it is kind of seen as that's more senior level when people became an educator in practice typically, and that's something that we see reflected in our practice educators. Now, as I'll go on to say, this isn't to kind of sort of belittle that, or that sort of not be something that we have an expectation for, but just that everybody can kind of contribute to practice-based learning is ethos. The band fives or the physiotherapy role is catching up and overtaking, which is cool to see. Brilliant. So thinking about next slide, please, Stephanie. So thinking about the new module specifically, why I've been invited to speak today, is we talk about patient education quite a lot across various different modules on the programme, which of course is really important, and it has a huge role in modern contemporary physiotherapy and healthcare more broadly. However, what this module is specifically going to be thinking about is that education pillar as being education for ourselves as well as our kind of colleagues in the healthcare team. And we hope to empower our learners to recognise their important role in practice-based learning throughout their careers, including when they're newly qualified, as well as they're still ongoing students as well. And like I said before, instilling that culture of normality in the workplace, that students are there, they're part of the supernumerary workforce. So therefore, as part of the module, facilitating an educator training session consistent with the training we deliver for our qualified practice educators, in line with the new guidelines on practice education, as well as AHP principles and best practice, including safe learning environment filter, for example. So all learners who attend will be equipped with the knowledge on how to support placement delivery and the expectations of placement delivery and education, and they will gain their practice educator training certificate, which they can add to their portfolio, which they can hopefully show off when they go to interview as well. Interestingly, and just kind of supporting students in personal tutorials, I am seeing Band 5 opportunities and kind of entering into the workforce with clinical educator training as a desirable criteria, which is really exciting, and I think speaks to kind of and reaffirms the approach that I'm sort of purporting today. So therefore, having the opportunity to complete the practice educator training and understanding their role in practice education before they qualify, we hope will support our learners at Lincoln to have the expected knowledge and skills across physiotherapy practice, reflecting their role in an evolving modern contemporary workforce. This is evidence informed as well. So peer learning, as we're starting to see reflected in various different pieces of literature, is we're seeing that sort of like perceived closer level of experience is really, really valuable. And we're seeing in the evidence, it's demonstrating that this approach increases confidence in the team working skills in learners. So that was Makowski et al. In 2021 and Taylor in 2024 that have kind of demonstrated this opportunity to build some of these other really important non-technical, I say non-technical because they're incredibly technical, but what they're classed as non-technical skills in the workplace with regards to team working and obviously practicing these skills as well. And then in 2020, Alexander's et al. Also explored the thoughts of physiotherapy learners regarding their placement experiences. And they found that learners felt more comfortable on placement working with band fives and band sixes, and those that they perceived to be more similar kind of level of knowledge and experience, which is really consistent with the feedback we receive from our own learners regarding their placement experience. Now, as I've already alluded to, this is not to say, and it would be going completely against Jen's guidance to say that this takes away the important role that other levels of experience and years of experience can bring to practice education. It's just thinking about that practice education is everybody's business. And by bringing new graduates as part of the clinical education team, we hope to optimise the experience for students on placement. So I am conscious that the people that are on here today, I'm probably preaching a little bit to the choir, outlining the value of being practice educators for obviously supporting the students and our own learning and development as well. And they often say that the best way to understand something and learn something is to teach it. So hopefully this initiative that we're doing in terms of sort of facilitating our students to be able to be practice educators if they feel comfortable to when they enter the physiotherapy workforce as qualified physiotherapists, is that it will translate into even more high quality placements as an expectation for everyone to contribute to sustaining the profession of physiotherapy through providing placement opportunities. We feel we have our physiotherapy learners have so much to offer, and we really trust them to offer this as practice-based learning educators. So we are in the some caveats here. So we are in the planning stage. The module is yet to run, and we're interested in exploring the perceptions and the confidence in learners about their readiness to become practice education, or at least see where they fit in terms of that role once they're qualified. We are keen to work with clearly our students and other stakeholders and learn from others about this approach that we're taking. But yeah, I'm really excited about this opportunity that we're providing to our learners. And thank you for listening. And I hope that was kind of within my time that I was allowed.
Absolutely, Leanne. Thank you so much for sharing that. It was really interesting to hear the approach you're taking at the University of Lincoln. I'm really excited to see where this goes. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. Can I have the next slide, please? So, like I mentioned earlier on in the webinar, we have produced what we're classing as kind of as minimum ideas of what should be included in our practice educator training. Now, what came out of the survey, like I said, is that generally our practice educators feel that they're getting, the right skills taught on a practice educator training, which is great. However, what they did mention was that really they like the idea of learning from case studies and having those having those examples of how to do it. It's fine learning about something, but they want to know how to put things into practice. So these are the ideas, these are what we've come up with in terms of our what we're suggesting need to be included on practice educator training. And this came from the surveys that were sent out to our learners and our practice educators. So, firstly, how to determine learners' achievements in relation to the assessment. Like I say, it's nothing groundbreaking, it's reaffirmative. A lot of these things are being done already. Um, Obviously, to support with this, we have a lot of resources around CPAF on our website. Some of them have been updated just the other week, actually, to add even more in there around CPAF 2024. So please do and go and have a little look at that. The next one is how to create an inclusive environment for all, including international students and learners with additional learning needs. Again, it's that how to, that case study based learning, that actually what are really good examples and how can we start to do this a little bit more. How to support learners who are struggling. Again, something that, is what we want people to be able to do to recognize when our learners may be finding things difficult, have ideas and tricks up their sleeve to know how to then implement things to help support them to help them develop. And again, I think you will have seen that in CPAF 2024, we've changed the wording from kind of record of warning to kind of cause for concern, making it more supportive. And that's another opportunity that you can, develop those links with the HEI, ask for help, ask for support, without making it sound so severe for the student. How to use a whole team approach to support a placement experience. This came out really strongly from both the learners and the practice educators, wanting to really understand how to do this, how to really incorporate the whole team into practice-based learning opportunities. And I think it shows that our learners want to learn from lots of different people. And sometimes I think, that I don't know, there isn't really a traditional model, but very much when I was training years ago, it used to be one clinical educator, one student, and kind of that was it. And sometimes that can feel quite intense for both the learner and the practice educator. And we recognize now that really isn't the best way a lot of the time for people to learn. So thinking about how we can educate people, how we can use that whole team approach and how people can move forwards with that. How to alter teaching styles to meet the learner's needs. Again, that's great that our educators are recognizing that they need to be able to adapt their style to meet their learners' needs, and our learners are, I think, quite grateful when that happens and look for that skill in their practice educators as well. And how to incorporate evidence-based practice into education. And that was kind of twofold. How are we going to get our learners to be able to use evidence-based practice? What tips have we got to be able to get them to incorporate that? But also educators wanted to understand the evidence-based practice around education as well and how they can provide better placement experiences using the evidence that's out there also. And it was very much that how to that was really important to our practice educators. Next slide, please. And then talking a little bit around our practice educator update. So this also came from the survey. And what educators are telling us is really important is that they felt, it needs to be what's going to meet their needs. And we've got a great example that Katie and Joe are going to talk through in a few minutes around how they've developed something that really does meet the practice educator needs, because we need to recognise that someone who's been a practice educator for 1 or 2 years may have different needs and different learning needs than someone who's maybe been a practice educator for 20 years. And, people are going to have different strengths and different skills within practice education. So what came across quite strongly is that practice educator updates shouldn't just be seen as a tick box, something that has to be done. Actually, it should be part of CPD. It should be part of our learning and our development. And like I've already said, development and learning across the education pillar is really important. So we've included some possible topics for inclusion, and these were based on the survey that got sent out. So things like how to introduce leadership skills into practice-based learning, how to create psychological safety within a learning environment, how to support a learner who's failing, how to build on the topic of reasonable adjustments, because we recognise this is a massive topic, and there's always lots of questions around how we can be doing this. build on the topic of supporting international learners. And that's something that the CSP are focusing on this year as well. We have a work stream that's looking at the experience of international learners on UK courses. So that's something hopefully that we will be able to feed in and build on a little bit more to support HEI's delivering update training. Um, Different models of supervision, like we've already mentioned, people really wanting that to learn about that whole team approach, but we know there are so many different models of supervision that can be used within practice-based learning. And I think sometimes it's making people aware of that and giving people the confidence to try different models of supervision. Innovation in practice-based learning. We are seeing some amazing innovative placements out there right now, which is absolutely fantastic. So thinking about how people can be innovative and creative with their practice-based learning opportunities. And things like building on the topic of supporting students with additional learning needs as well. So it's great to have the basics, but actually some of these topics can be quite complex. So it's really important to really think about how we can update our skills and how we can build on the knowledge that we've gained in our initial practice educator training. So I'm going to hand over to Katie and Joe now, who I'm really excited about their model that they're going to share with you today. So I will let them talk to you about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Jen. Hi, everybody. So I'm Katie, and Joe and I are here today to talk about a piece of work that we've been supporting over the last couple of years to develop a practice education workspace. Stephanie, thank you. Do you want to pop the next slide on for us? So I think I'm talking to the converted here. So we wanted to recognise within our project the value of practice educators, and particularly in the context of some of the eye-wateringly high workforce figures we've seen in terms of the long-term workforce plan and potentially what might be in the 10-year plan coming up in the spring. And the CSP putting this on is sat really well with our project, you know, the value of learning whilst students are on placement. And, you know, the project is essentially developing a one-stop shop. So we wanted to bring together a sense of what actually was practice education, because we understood that it was a little bit different depending on where the university was delivering. And also, you know, we needed to pull together resource so that people could put placements on. That is easy, it makes sense, all of the commonly needed documents. So when we started this back in 2022, we wanted to develop a digital space where we could support a collaborative approach across universities to co-agree on their education packages for their practice educators. And we wanted to also understand what the current experiences of those practice educators were and the training offers that were out there. We then did some work looking at streamlining those opportunities so that we could offer something across multiple professions. And bringing together good practice examples. We've been linking up with the CSP throughout this project, and it's great to be part of these new guidelines. And also promoting a community of practice and also really pushing some of the training opportunities that are available. Next slide, please, Stephanie. Thank you. Brilliant. So when we started back in 2022, we had to ask ourselves a couple of questions. So firstly, what are the current experiences of practice educators? And also, what is practice education? So some of the experiences that we were hearing from practice educators were that they would have to go to University A and have some training and then do University B training and University C training. And it was a little bit onerous and a little bit, you know, for some repetitive. So that gave us a purpose and a need to look at this. And also at that stage, we had quite a lot of silo-based training offers, which sat in Teams channels and was quite challenging to extend organisationally. So we also sent out some surveys to nursing and midwifery leads and professional leads across allied health professions, including physiotherapy. And we asked them what actually was practice education for their profession. And as you can imagine, all of us did it differently. So even within one profession, some practice education offers were online, some were live, some were in the face-to-face in the classroom, some were 30 minutes and some were a day. So everybody did it slightly differently. But what we did is we felt that there were three overarching themes that ran across all of those different types of professions. And this is what we've mapped into our workspace. So the first step, the first level, is essentially about that whole team approach. So something that is about mentoring, supervision. It's about those supportive conversations to put on an inclusive placement offer. And in the Southeast, we've got an AHP practice education training programme that's available on the Learning Hub. It's been developed through Health Education England and the University of Winchester. So we thought that sat quite nicely with that first core theme. The second core theme that all of those professions highlighted is that they need to have an understanding where the student's coming from. So what has the student covered in their undergraduate programme? What can they do on placement? And where do I go for help as a practice educator? And in the south of England, from Bristol to Canterbury, we've got a physiotherapy programme collaborative across a wide group of universities that were already working together, and they were very keen for them to, they were very keen to work with us on this project. So we took that as an opportunity. And we were really lucky that it was actually in physiotherapy as well, because Joe and I both are physios. Step 3, so this is about the assessment. So any practice education offer, also from the work that we've done, had to include an academic piece. And again, in physiotherapy, we've got that common assessment document. So these 6 universities came on board, and we undertook a 6-month pilot testing out those 3 steps. And Stephanie, do you want to just pop on the next slide and I'll talk about some of the pilot data? Thank you, that's really helpful. So for 6 months in 2023, we basically asked those 6 university partners to invite their practice educators through this platform. So we built the platform, and we housed not only that training opportunity, but also commonly needed placement documents such as induction plans, timetables, reflective logs, learning logs, anything that we felt a placement could kind of need. We've also supported a lot of other areas such as reasonable adjustments and some of the extra resources that Joe will go on to explain in a second. So essentially what we asked them is, was it easy to create an account? What did we think about those 4 main tiles on the workspace? Did it make sense? Could they navigate them with ease? And we got some really positive feedback. So people were looking at a need for a centralisation of their CPD and training. They felt that the 4 main areas were easy to navigate and reasonable, and that they were able to create an account. So next slide, please, Stephanie.
Thank you.
So I'm just going to hand over to Joe. Okay, Joe.
Hello, I'm Jo. So this original pilot had involved the physio programmes of 6 HEIs, and we then moved into the next phase, where we were able to have conversations with other HEIs and welcomed several more onto the platform. The platform's enabling university programmes and their partners to share information regarding communities of practice, placement documentation and training. And during this bit of learning, this is where we then got involved with the CSP to explore this work that Jen's sharing with us today on practice education, because it felt really important that we were aligning with the professional body. This work also complemented and worked alongside the development of the interactive AHP Educator career framework. And that allowed us to propel this project out into the other AHPs. We attended network meetings across many of the AHPs, and over the next few months, several signed up to the platform: podiatry, occupational therapy, dietetics, with radiography and ODP hopefully soon to come on board. There's 35 programmes currently involved. Could you stop sharing, please? And I thought it would be helpful just to see the workspace, and it's housed on the future NHS platform, which I'm sure many of you will be using for other things. And there's a My Workspace tab that you'll see at the top of the screen. And in that, there's a Practice Educator training workspace. Anybody can ask to join it. And within the workspace, there's different sections, but the main section for the practice educators is this members area. And just to illustrate what Katie's been talking about, the first tab is Taking a Learner. And when you press on that, you then see the 3 steps of the practice educator training. So step 1, as we've said, is the generic one. I'll just go into step 2 to illustrate. These are the universities currently involved. And if you pick on any individual university, you then can see the courses that are involved from that university. And if you follow those tabs, you then will see the specific course information for that university. And in a lot of cases, a lot of other information too, if that's useful to the practice educator at the time. The third step, as Katie said, is the assessment form. We're really lucky in physio to have the CPAF form, so that we've then got a link to that and the guidance documents that come alongside. But for other professions, they've got individual ones, and so they have university-specific assessment forms on there as well. We also have, and I'm going to go on and talk a little bit more about this, but we've also got the within this the opportunity to have the multi-professional webinars, which you can link through that bottom button. And within the resources, we've got recordings of those so that people can access them asynchronously, which hopefully gives us a flexible workspace for people, that this can be when it suits their life, not whether they happen to be at work when a resource is being delivered. Further through the platform, there's links to the Educator Career Framework, obviously very important for us as educators, with practice education being a key part of that. And at the bottom, for HEIs that want to come on board, we've got an academic programme support area. Thank you, Steph. We'll come back to the slides. So to date, we have 850 members now on the workspace. We had 720 visits between September and January. We have new members joining daily, and it's always lovely when you share it with somebody, and then we see coming in people coming to have a look and see what it does offer. It gets a lot of traffic. In January, we had 4,200 different viewings of areas of the platform, and this is similar month to month. You can see on the graph on this slide, people visit for very different reasons, but it's nice that lots of the areas are accessed regularly. Next slide, please. Sorry, and one more. I think I did the first one. Sorry for anybody who wanted to see that. We've developed a multi-layered approach to practice education. Practice education is obviously key, and within the platform, they've got access to the generic training that we've talked about, the assessment information, but we've also got profession-specific information ongoing. As I alluded to when I was showing you the platform, in the second phase of this project, we developed this shared training resource. So when any HEI signs up to join the platform, they're saving themselves hours of training over the month and the year, because no longer do you have to deliver that 3-hour, 6-hour, depending on which HEI you come from, because that's all then stored as an online resource for people to access. And what we're asking in exchange for those HEIs, that they produce 2 half-hour training webinars a year. They're delivered as a live, which is seen on the calendar on the workspace. But what that's allowing us to do is to produce a body of work for educators to see what they need as part of their practice education needs, and so it can be tailored to an individual. And over time, this is going to give us a rich and broad selection that can be tailored to an individual. Practice educators then are encouraged to listen to 2 webinars a year. So this is their update. In the Southeast, 3 years was what had historically been done for retraining, but actually looking at something every year and seeing those updates. And so within that 3-year window, they'll have listened to 6 different webinars rather than the 3-year repeat, which had been a repeat of what they'd had at the beginning, and so not enriching their education and their learning. Next slide, please, Steph. So this is some examples of the webinars that are currently up. The feeling is that this means that our practice educators stay up to date, but with a focus on things that interest them. And as more AHPs come on board, we're also hoping that actually we start to learn about things that maybe we hadn't even realised we were using within our practice. And so we become richer education specialists as a result. So we've gone from that tick box refresher that Jen referred to a variety of multi-professional resources. Next slide, please. So where are we going from here? We're encouraging collaborative conversations. We're supporting other groups. So we're looking with an occupational therapy group to look at a combined assessment form. We're supporting universities to work better together. We're upscaling. This started in the southeast, but we've now had many conversations around the country. We've got the first HEI on in the Midlands, and others are looking to come on board. We know there's some good collaborative work going up in the north, and we hope that we can join up and have this as a site that people can store all practice education needs to make our practice educators' lives easier. We know, and as Jen said so eloquently, time is precious, and so this feels like it gives an opportunity to save people a lot of time. We're also having conversations with our nursing and midwifery colleagues, and we'll share this collaboration with them. We want to be sharing all education opportunities. We've now got the interactive educator framework, and that does help people on their journeys. We're sharing this at national conferences, and are really happy to be cited as a best practice example on these guidelines. I hope you agree it's a creative, sustainable, flexible package, and certainly a huge time saver for all those involved. Everyone's an educator, and if you are hearing about this for the first time, please do get in touch and come join the platform if it works for you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Katie and Joe, for sharing that example with us. It really is exciting. You've got a lot of questions in the chat and the Q&A, sorry. So would you mind having a look and responding to people there, please? And it'd be great if you could put your link to the platform in the Q&A. That would be fab. Thank you. So the next guidance paper that we've produced is guidance for managers, just looking at the key points within this guidance paper. And like I've said before, we recognise that some organisations have a lot of support for their practice educators and for their students. Some organisations have whole teams to support their educators and students. Some people just have one practice educator facilitator, for example, who might support a lot of AHPs. And some organisations have none of that support. So sometimes a lot of the support falls to the managers, for example. So it's just really recognising there is a lot of variation within organisations at the moment of what support is out there and what support is offered to our practice educators. But like I've said before, we expect a lot from our practice educators, and there's a lot of skills that people need to develop. And sometimes the role of a practice educator can be quite tough. As well, very, very rewarding as well. But sometimes there's times when you think, actually, this is quite hard. And who do I turn to and where do I get support for myself with this? So the guidance for managers outlines the expectations from the HCPC, CSP, NHSE, and other bodies across the UK as well. We have a section on supporting our educator wellbeing, and I think this is really, really important. We know how pressured people are right now. Whatever sector you work in, it feels quite pressured. So it really is important that we're focusing on the wellbeing of our educators, because if we don't have any educators, we don't have any future workforce. So it is really important that we're really focusing on the wellbeing here. So we have information on using a fair share model and what fair share models are out there. And Leanne is going to give a great example of what she's introduced at Sherwood Forest Hospitals in a few minutes. We have advice on taking a team approach and how managers can encourage that and how and what that means. Um, we have information on thinking about debriefing opportunities. What opportunities do your educators have to debrief? Where is it they can turn to? And I know, for example, in Nottinghamshire, Leanne might touch on this. They've got a lovely community of practice now that's been set up for their AHP educators, where people have time to come together to work a little bit on kind of, have learning opportunities, but also have that time to debrief amongst other educators as well, and hopefully build some connections and build some networks there. But also as a manager, what debriefing opportunities are you able to offer your staff, whether that be through supervision, through one-to-ones, through checking in with them when you know they've got students. Touching points, kind of understanding the process as well. Sometimes physiotherapy managers are very much involved in practice education, and we've got great example in the guidance papers when the PDF version of managers who are delivering practice-based learning opportunities themselves, who are fully engaged in the process. But not all managers do this at the moment. So actually information there, kind of understanding the process around, linking with HEIs, how the process works, and in kind of producing practice-based learning opportunities. And also the processes in place so when things aren't quite going to plan, so they can support their educators if their educators are supporting a student who's needing additional support, or they have some concerns. Actually, what is the process? Because we know that actually we've got some great processes in place for getting support from HEIs, from recognizing when students aren't, are needing a little bit of extra help. And when things often fall down is when the processes aren't followed. So actually it's just making managers aware what the process, that they can support their educators with that. We've got a section as well on developing our educators. And I think I've probably mentioned this about 5 times already, so forgive me for being so repetitive, but how important it is to develop our skills within the education pillar, as it is to develop skills across all 4 pillars of practice. But the importance, obviously, we've spoken about our practice educator training, our update training, but also what further development opportunities are there? And we're seeing some great examples of enhanced practice apprenticeships, which focus on developing practice educators. So we're seeing some great examples of where people can really develop further within the education pillar if they wish. There's also information in there on developing an education team, and another best practice example included in the guidance from Nuffield Health, and they've worked really hard over these past few months on really developing a fantastic education team to really support their practice educators and their learners. But also in this guidance is really pushing those opportunities to collaborate with HEIs. We know having great links between our placement providers and our HEIs is really important. It helps that two-way communication. It helps with understanding the workforce needs of the future. It really helps with understanding the stresses from both sides and looking at how we can work together. And I think system working has shown some great improvements in that. And we're seeing some great links, and particularly at system level, of how our HEIs and our managers can be working together for the benefit of all. So we're seeing some great points around that. And that's all included within the guidance for managers. So I do encourage you, the link is further on in the slides. I do encourage you to have a little look at the guidance papers that is available on the website right now. Next slide, please. So for our final best practice example for today, I'd like to introduce Leanne Horsley. She's going to talk about the wonderful work she's been doing across Nottinghamshire, and particularly the fair share model that she's introduced at Sherwood Forest Hospitals. Thanks, Leanne.
Brill, thank you very much, Jen. And firstly, just to say thank you very much to you and to the TSP for having me and listening to our story. You know who I am now. Jen's mentioned my title a couple of times. I am also the AHP Workforce Development Programme Manager for the Nottingham and Nottinghamshire Integrated Care System, which is an NHSE funded role, which I've done for a little while. And I apologise because I can't help but flex between both roles when I talk about this work. So I will link some of our organisation specific work to some of our integrated care system work, because like Jen said before, they are quite complementary. Can I have the next slide, please, Steph? So I wanted to tell you a little bit about who I am, really just to give you an idea about why I personally care so much about placements and supporting students and supporting our practice educators out in our organisations. So I've been a physio for this year, 15 years, and I worked in the ICCU speciality. So I rotated around the junior rotations for about 4.5, 5 years, and then I worked on ICCU. After a couple of years of doing that role, we created a new role in our organisation, which was the clinical educator role for respiratory physiotherapy. So essentially what I was responsible for is the training and the updating of all of our on-call physiotherapy workforce in our organisation. It was an incredible role that I did for a number of years, and I absolutely loved it. And after a couple of years in the role, I was asked by the organisation to also pick up physiotherapy placement coordination. I guess as a reflection of my passion for supporting learners in practice, whether they be students or newly qualified staff, or actually staff who have been qualified for a long time and need updating and supporting with CPD. All of those roles kind of blend in terms of time. So I've done lots of 2 days a week and 3 days a week of jobs over an amount of time. And in February 2020, just before the pandemic hit, I was also privileged to be offered the integrated care system workforce development role, which was part of what AHP faculties were, for those that are familiar with that language from back in the day. So it's just to give you an idea of my background and the kind of things that I've been doing, and I guess how I've ended up being so passionate about supporting learners. Can I have the next slide, please, Steph? So to give you an idea of our organisation, because I am going to talk about a fair share model, and I think it's quite difficult to understand out of context. We are a district general organisation. We have 3 hospital sites. So we have the Kingsmill Hospital site, which is based in actually Sutton and Ashfield, but everybody thinks that is in Mansfield, which is in the Midlands in the Nottinghamshire area. We have Newark Hospital and we have Mansfield Community Hospital, and we have about 5,500 staff across our 3 sites. We have, I say, approximately 600 inpatient beds, because those that work in acute organisations will know that that flexes and changes on a day-to-day basis. And I've popped a little note to myself there to update the number of physiotherapists that we have. So I wanted to get you the most updated number. The most updated number that I can find is that we have a whole-time equivalent of about 93 physiotherapists, which is about 111 different people. So the head count is about 111. We mainly have students from 3 HEIs, although we do welcome students from all over the country, depending on personal circumstances. Have the next slide, please, Steph. So we introduced a fair share model, as Jen mentioned at the beginning. And the first thing I often want to talk about is why. Why did we introduce a fair share model? We had a great opportunity in that the pandemic paused placements, physiotherapy placements, and all sorts of placements really across the organisation. We had 3 student physios who were out on placement during the pandemic in the paid band 3 roles that Health Education England supported at the time, but none of our local HEIs were that keen to send their students as part of that offer, so they were all out of area for us. So what I saw was a real opportunity to introduce something new when we restarted those placements as part of the relaunch of physiotherapy placements in our organisation. What I'd also reflected on in various meetings before the pandemic hit, when the role was quite new to me, was that our placement numbers were low compared to the size of our establishment. Other organisations in HEI placement partnership meetings were talking about fair share models, were mentioning, thinking about these things. And I was looking at our kind of model and thinking, we haven't really got anything that's formalised in our organisation. The spread of our placements across our services was uneven. So some of our services had done nothing for a number of years. Some of our services were doing the bulk of the placements that we were offering our organisation. And when you spoke to our staff, a lot of staff felt that they were unable to host placements, and that was because of their own working hours. So, for example, they worked 4 long days and they felt that that wasn't suitable for a student, or they worked part-time and they felt that they didn't know what to do with the students on the day that they weren't working. So a lot of it was around the personal circumstances of their own kind of working life. We had no real process for placement offers and student allocation at the time. So everything was almost offered on an ad hoc basis. So I felt that as somebody with kind of my approach to organisation, that I wanted to take a bit of leadership around that and do things a little bit differently. We also had rotational staff. We had a system where rotational staff were not accounted for, and we've got quite a big rotational workforce in our organisation. So that was creating problems for our HEIs. They were getting student placement offers quite late. It was difficult for them to plan as part of that process. We had a low number of applicants at the time for our newly qualified physiotherapy posts. So that was one of the key kind of workforce drivers. And some staff were starting to feel frustrated that they were doing lots and that their colleagues were doing not very much, or that was the perception. And we did have de-skilling of some of our clinical educators as well in our workforce. Have the next slide, please, Steph. So what did we do? We didn't have any formal guidance at the time on the amount of students that each qualified physiotherapist should take. We still don't have that guidance compared to other professions like speech and language therapy who do. What we recognised that a lot of the kind of problems that we were seeing were coming from a lack of leadership around the placement allocation and offering process, and also a shift to staff working part-time more flexibly, as I said before. We wanted to create a model which attempted to address that issue. So staff feeling that they couldn't offer because they worked flexibly, because they worked part-time. And we wanted to create a feeling of fairness across the teams. So we created a fair share model, which we did create it internally based on common sense, and that we felt addressed our own internal problems. When I've presented this before, I've been asked a lot of times, where's the evidence to say that this is a good number? Where's the guideline that suggests this? We didn't have a guideline. We just created something that we felt was really sensible and that we felt was fair for our physiotherapy workforce. Our fair share model is allocated to teams, so individual clinical teams rather than individual physiotherapists. And we felt that that provided flexibility within our teams, and it provided the ability to problem solve when we got staffing changes, and really supported our team and our educator wellbeing. So it gave that bit of flexibility that we just need in our clinical teams. We did allow our larger teams to grow over time. We had some teams who on their fair share model were going from very few physio placements to quite a lot of physiotherapy placements. And we felt that they needed to grow over years rather than just being asked to do something very different in one single year. And we grew the model year on year to reflect educator confidence within the team. So we've had this model in place now for 5 years. So we have changed the model ever so slightly year on year, which has meant that we've just been able to reflect different challenges and things within the team. And I have got an example that I can show you a little bit later on. We've got guidelines. We don't have hard and fast rules. And we recognise that there's nuance to everything. Every team will have its own different situation. It will need to flex and adapt depending on that. And I work really closely with the clinical team leaders to make sure that they feel supported in that as well. And we have started to train our clinical educators a little bit earlier than they needed, just to allow observation of students in the team with qualified clinical educators, and to allow that on-the-job reflection. So we have started to introduce that a little bit earlier. We didn't have a hard and fast rule before, but most people were starting to take students probably in their first band 6 role, or when they've been qualified for around 2 years. So we've started to encourage that a little bit sooner. And the next slide, please, Steph. So this was our fair share model in 2020. All staff that worked over 0.8 of a whole-time equivalent or 4 days were to have 1.5 students a year. Now, we're very aware that we can't chop the legs off of a student, but it was 1.5 placements a year. And then all staff that worked less than that, so under that 0.8 whole-time equivalent, would have 0.75. The idea of having a part placement was to encourage staff to have to work together and share students on placement so that they didn't feel that they got sole responsibility for one person and that meant that they had to be in every single day. So it was to encourage staff to share those placements. Next slide, please, Steph. So as an example of what this looks in practice, this is something I get asked all the time. We have a performer, which you can see on the right-hand side, which is sent to all of our clinical team leads. It's got very clear instructions on the top of it. And what we ask them to do is to list every staff member in their team. We also ask them to list exactly how many hours or whole-time equivalent that person works. And then we ask them to calculate how many students they should have in that team over that next academic year. So we normally do this in the early spring, ready for the September starts. And you can see there a perfect example of where we've had a team leader list their team and then add up. This is really helpful for me as the placement coordinator, because it means that the team leaders really understand where that number comes from. So I don't go to them and say, you must have 8 placements this year or 8 students this year, or however we've calculated it. They do that working out and they understand where that number has come from. One thing just to note on this piece of paper is you can see that we've got rotational band 5. We account for the post of one rotational band 5, not the fact that those band 5s rotate every 4 months and therefore they will have more than one person every year. That is the flexibility piece that comes in, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a later slide. Next slide, please, Steph. So this is an example. So if this is our to keep it really simple, for argument's sake, this is our team of 5 physiotherapists. So we've got the team leader in the middle, and they will have 0.75 students because they don't work 4 days a week. On the left-hand side there, we've got our static and our rotational band 6. So they will both take 1.5 students each. And on the right-hand side, we've got our rotational band 5s, and we've got one that's only 6 weeks qualified and one that's 18 months qualified. Okay, so if you imagine I'm the team leader of that team, I might be thinking, well, my rotational band 5 is not going to take responsibility wholly for a student in 6 weeks post-qualification, but my 18 months post-qualification is probably going to be quite interested in supporting a student as part of their rotation. So the team leader will have offered placements based on their allocation, but it gives them flexibility to allow different staff members to take on different placements or students across the year. So it might be that the team leader will think, well, we will on this rotation, we'll just have the one student, but later on, we might get somebody who rotates who is a little bit different. And that flexibility really works its way out across the year. It just allows different staff members to really take up the opportunity if they want it, or if we've got staff members who are focusing on different priorities at that time, then that's absolutely fine as well. So it's quite supportive of our rotational staff. One thing I will say is lots of our rotational staff end up having more students than that, and lots of our teams end up having more students than is their fair share allocation, particularly our static staff. So our static kind of band 6 staff will often really enjoy having more students and will take on more of their fair share allocation throughout the years. So I think that's a nice reflection of how supported they feel by the fair share model. Next slide, please. Just to give you an idea of how this has evolved over the 5 years, I guess how the fair share models evolved, but also how teams evolve. This is the same team. So we can see now there are no band 5s within this team, and we've got quite a lot of band 6s. We have changed now to staff that are working more than 4 days a week have 7 weeks of placement allocation. That is a reflection really of how we're asked to calculate placements by NHS England now. So when the fair share model was introduced in 2020, we didn't have a tariff portal. We weren't asked to calculate placements in hours. We are now. So we're definitely moving more towards a numeric calculation rather than a single placement. very helpful because we're aware that some placements are 4 weeks and some placements are 12 weeks. So one placement it lacked definition really, whereas 7 weeks is 7 weeks and everyone understands that. And we do have all staff working less than 4 days a week on that 3.5 week allocation a year. And again, just encourages people to work together. I will say we can do 7 weeks of placement. So it has meant that one kind of full-time worker can offer a placement just on their own now. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to talk too much about this, but what this did is massively increase our placement numbers. What you can see over the years as we go from 2019 to the current day is we had a big kind of rise in numbers, and then we've had a little bit of a drop off as well. We've also had a drop off of our offers being used by our local HEIs, so we're working with those HEIs to find out why that is. One of the biggest reasons, and I'll come on to this on the last slide, is that we're giving our clinical educators choice about when they offer that placement across the year, and they tend to choose the same time of year. So we've got some additional work to do internally to just try and get that spread to be better across the year. So we've got plans at a system level actually to start to work with our HEIs in slightly more strategic allocation of those placement offers. Next slide, please. And this is the last one. So the key really, as Jen already said, is partnering with our HEIs and monitoring that. So it's having the capacity to really look about offers that potentially won't be used, can they be offered elsewhere, supporting our teams to make sure they're aware of all the things that we've spoken about throughout this whole webinar. So it's great to see this piece of work, because I think it'll really make a difference to our clinical educator workforce. For this to work and to increase placements that much, our clinical educators have really needed that support of that back office process. So it is myself, we have somebody in a central role who orders all the IT, sorts out all of the parking, does all of the inductions. And that's been really, really key, because it's meant they've been able to focus really on supporting them in clinical practice, me taking away those little headaches that really do put people off offering placements. Our clinical educator upskilling was obviously required for such growth in placements, and that continues to be something that we continually push with our workforce internally. Our clinical educator confidence has definitely improved. So we've got placements that are being offered across the 4 pillars of practice now. We've got staff that are offering 2-to-1 models, who prefer 2-to-1 models, who are doing all sorts of team approaches, blended approaches. So that's really, really lovely to see. We've really come on quite a long way in the last 5 years. Everything has been facilitated by the introduction of CPAP. I think everybody can agree with that. For us in our organisation, physical space is a challenge, and actually fitting students in and learners in. And one thing I recognise just from my ICS role is it's not a model that you can pick up and pop in any organisation. So I think there is an element of thinking about what works for your areas. So certainly for our community providers, this isn't something that can be replicated in exactly the same way. They've got a fair share model themselves, but it's quite different to what ours looks like, still with the same kind of principles. There's still lots of myths to be busted in our clinical educator workforce around the things you can and can't do, and there's still a lot of underconfidence when we speak to people. People are very worried about getting told off by the universities for allowing flexibility and things like that. So I think that's quite key. I think webinars like this will really, really help. And anecdotally, educators appear to be more satisfied with this model. So we're not having anybody with sour feelings, really, because they think they're doing lots and they think that their colleagues aren't doing so much. We have adopted it in other professions. So in our therapy services department, our occupational therapy workforce now have a fair share model, and it seems similar benefits. So that's great. Of course, it's income generating to our organisation, which is great. But recruitment to our newly qualified practitioner roles now, so our newly qualified physio roles, is not an issue at all. In fact, we're possibly moving in the opposite direction. I think that is the last slide, Steph. So I'll hand back over to Jen.
Thank you so much, Leanne. It's great to hear about the fair share model, and also how it's evolved and how you changed it over the past 5 years, and also about the positive impact it's having on your practice educators as well. And it's great to see their educator confidence growing, and also how they're trialing new models of practice, practice-based learning and the innovation there. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. So just the last thing from me is this is the link to our webpage where you'll find the guidance. So the web guidance is out there now, and I believe the PDF guidance won't be too far behind. It's almost there. So it's a little bit more detail in the PDF to the web page, but the web page is there for you to go and have a look at. Next slide, please, Steph. And that's it. Any questions?